The source of our pride, the Garrett, Neely, and Sullivan families. 200 years of African American history, beginning in Lawrence County, South Carolina. This is a 178-page Black family heritage book originally published in 1996 and republished in 2000. With dimensions of 8.5 by 11 inches, this book is of coffee table prominent display design. Author LaBrenda Garrett-Nelson spotlights the family's education and includes pages designated for additions to the family story. The book is published by Family Tree Press, an imprint of independent publisher iUniverse.com, and it's presented by Family Tree Magazine. Garrett-Nelson was born in upstate South Carolina, reared in Brooklyn, and settled in Washington, D.C. She earned a bachelor's degree from the City University of New York's John Jay College of Criminal Justice, as well as both JD and LLM law degrees from New York University. Specializing in tax law, she also is a certified genealogist who focuses on rigorous evidence standards. Among her other books is A Guide to Researching African American Ancestors in Lawrence County, South Carolina. That book capitalizes on her specialty in researching African American enslaved ancestors. Also, Garrett-Nelson is the principal writer and editor of two church histories, documenting their founding African American families. She says empirical evidence as the standard for research, especially on enslaved people, allows her to take full advantage of the habits and skills she honed during more than 3 decades as a DC tax attorney. Dedication reads, "This is dedicated to my paternal grandparents, Mattie Neely Garrett and Albert Elton Garrett I, and my daughter, Alexis." Title, author background, and dedication. We get that Garrett-Nelson wrote this book to explain what undergirds her self-reverence and her family reverence. She wrote it to situate her ancestral home in South Carolina, to take full advantage of career habits and skills and apply them to her family legacy, to honor ancestors, and to thank family. Acknowledgements read, "Appreciation is extended to the many family members who've been generous with their time and memories, vintage photographs, and invaluable documents. My father, Thomas Weldon Garrett Sr., who never tired of my questions, and his wife, Tina, who helped to gather information about family members currently living in Lawrence County. My brother, Albert Elton Garrett II, who checked out cemeteries, spent time with me in the Lawrence County Library, and followed up on leads in lines. My sister, Denise Garrett Fredericks, for her encouragement and assistance in providing photographs and obtaining information from family members living in New York City. My aunts, Frances Boston, Mary Garrett Thompson, and Lenora Grayson. They answered many questions. My third cousin, Beryl Dacres Burton, who joined in the initial search and reviewed census records and other archives. My fourth cousin, David Emanuel Nicholson, who spent time with me in his attic on one of the warmest days in Washington, D.C., and made available his skills as an editor. My third cousin, once removed, Josephine Simons Wade, who filled me in on her branch of the Garrett family. My second cousin, once removed, Perry Sullivan II, who reconstructed the Perry Sullivan I family tree. My first cousin's Tony Grayson, who had the foresight to interview our grandmother, Mattie Neely Garrett, and others, and Mary Elaine Hunter, who received many phone calls. My second cousin, once removed, Altamise Sullivan Culver, who has wonderful memories, and Lily Williams Timms, founder and president of the African American Historical Society of Lawrence, South Carolina, who has Garrett relations. Others made significant contributions to this volume before passing on. Arthur Reed Alberta McCoy, who searched the U.S. Census records for descendants of Haley Sullivan. Mattie Neely Garrett, my inspiration. Ellington Cortez Moore, who researched the Neelys, and especially Ruth Simons Nicholson, who did extensive genealogical research of Garrett's and discovered documents such as our African ancestors' deed of manumission and the program from the 1934 reunion. A newfound cousin, Lois Jurgen Elmore, added to our store of information about the African for this second edition of our family history. A special thanks to my husband, Paul Nelson, for his patience as he spent many evenings occupying himself while I was on the telephone with family members or typing away at the computer. This shall be written for the generations to come. Psalm 102, verse 18. From these acknowledgments, we get that Garrett-Nelson wrote this book to show gratitude to those who aided her research, to update her family's story with new information, and to spiritually uplift the generation to come. For the fullness of Psalm 102, verse 18, in the 1599 Geneva Bible reads, "This shall be written for the generation to come, and the people which shall be created shall praise the Lord." Is divided into sections of biographical sketches by the three family lines, covering the Garretts, the Neelys, and the Sullivans. The Garrett section includes the couple Ike and Hannah Garrett, with Ike and Hannah's mother Lucy here pictured. Notably, the book includes a 7-page section that chronicles where family members were educated. It names more than 250 relatives and 128 schools they attended. The introduction reads, "Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave." From Maya Angelou's Still I Rise. This is a biographical history of 3 African American families that are connected through blood ties spanning 3 centuries. The Garrett, Neely, and Sullivan families first came together in Lawrence County, South Carolina during slavery time. Thus, as is true of most Black families in slavery, only bits and pieces of their individual histories survive, fragmentary clues about who these people were. In this regard, the descendants of Garretts, Neelys, and Sullivans are somewhat fortunate because their forebears retained strong family identities. That our names had origins with whites matters little, for our names embody a living history. The survival of these families is particularly impressive in light of the world in which the earliest among them lived and flourished. South Carolina was unique in establishing the legal framework for slavery. Even before the colony was settled, 4 of the Lord Proprietors of the colony were members of the Royal African Company, the holder of the African slave trade monopoly. The colony, which was settled relatively late, possessed a preponderantly Black population and a large number of African imports. Comparatively, few slaves were owned in the upcountry where Lawrence County is located. Most slaves were in the coastal belt or low country. In 1785, 9 years after the independence of the United States, the South Carolina General Assembly passed an act establishing Lawrence and 5 other counties. Lawrence County was originally inhabited by the Cherokee. The city of Lawrence, the county seat, is one of the oldest towns in South Carolina. Lawrence County is divided into 9 townships, including Sullivan, where Hickory Tavern is located, the home of many family members, sometimes referred to on old maps as tumbling shoals. Colonial South Carolinians preferred certain African ethnic groups over others as slaves. Merchant Henry Lawrence, for whom the county was named, wrote the following to one correspondent: "The slaves from the River Gambia are preferred to all others with us, save the Gold Coast. In the early years, there was a preponderance of slaves identified with Congo, Angola. Most Africans enslaved in America arrived prior to for independence, nearly half coming between 1740 and 1780. Only 1,562 Africans were brought into South Carolina between 1741 and 1750. Between 1751 and 1760, 18,889 Africans were imported. From 1761 to 1770, 18,687 slaves were imported. And in the 5 years between 1771 and 1775, 19,215 Africans survived the passage to Charleston. Between 1804 and 1807, 40,000 were rushed to Charleston in anticipation of the prohibition to begin with 1808. One could always find a small number of free persons of African descent in South Carolina, a little over 3,000 at the beginning of the 19th century and nearly 10,000 in 1860. At the same time, the number of slaves in Lawrence County grew from 1,919 in the year 1800 to more than 13,000 in the year 1860. Beginning in 1800, the state legislature began to restrict manumissions, culminating in the banning of personal manumissions in 1820. Even before restrictions were enacted, it was a crime to teach a slave to write. Nevertheless, at the time of emancipation in South Carolina, a majority of the free Negroes could read and write, and perhaps 5% of the slaves. South Carolina has always been pointed to as the typical Reconstruction state. It had, in 1860, 412,329 Negroes and 291,000 whites. The lawlessness in South Carolina after the Civil War was also typical, as documented by W.E.B. Du Bois. In Edgefield and Lawrence County, South Carolina, there were organized bands of regulators, armed men who make it their business to traverse these counties and maltreat Negroes, in many instances in the most horrible and atrocious manner. From the introduction, we got 2 more reasons that Garrett-Nelson wrote this book, bringing the stated reasons in the usual places to at least 11. The reasons include to show off ancestral gifts, to contrast the family's strong identity with weak identities of other Black families who know and connect with solely fragments of their enslaved ancestors' lives, to demonstrate ancestral heroism by flourishing amid slavery and other global racism, to explain what undergirds self and family reverence, and to spiritually uplift the generation to come. In the next episode of this series, we talk about why author Alvin J. Snyder wrote Mayfield and Snyder, Portrait of a Family. Be sure to check out all the series in the HBCUHeritageHome.com podcast, so that you can be delighted by all things Black genealogy books.